Hey nerds, I was talking to some nerd and we were wondering about why Italian airplane engines, or just Italian engines in general, why they were so bad. Why, or at least why they made so little power. I did some digging, I've done some research, and I have a perfect example here to show you. This is the ever-present Italian Fiat G50. It's one of their most common frontline fighters, even though it still had an open cockpit, and a two-row, 14-cylinder radial engine. We're going to use ground realistic battles here for demonstration. I have, we're all based on 1.7. That's 1.3, but don't worry about that little guy. So this is a tank, as you can see. It is an Italian tank. It's not great. The best things that the Italians had, Italian tanks were bad because this is a small country. They didn't have a ton of industry, so they couldn't build a ton of tanks. And the tanks they did build were small and weak. So even what they'd call medium or heavy tanks was more comparable to American light tanks. You know, what the Italians called a heavy tank was roughly equivalent to an M4 Sherman. Now, they're not completely terrible. Yes, armor is bad. Yes, engines are weak and make little horsepower. And my single biggest complaint are their machine guns. Here, as you can see, this vehicle has three. 1, 2, 3. Because they're all the same magazine-fed machine gun. They don't have belt-fed machine guns in their tanks. At least not yet. So in order to have any kind of sustained fire, they would have two machine guns side by side for, what do they call this guy? The machine gunner to operate. And then you would just alternate which gun you're firing while you're reloading the other one. Anyway, the one good thing they do have, let me go back to the X-ray here, is their gun. While most other tanks have a 37mm gun, the Italians had a 47mm gun. So, compared to contemporary late 30s designs, think of it as a glass cannon. A slow glass cannon. That's the only thing you got. A decent gun. The other vehicles I'm bringing here, this is an early AA vehicle with a clip-fed 20mm cannon for shooting at planes, and this is a truck with a cannon. Back to the Fiat and crappy engines. I will talk about this. I'm going to turn on a booster, boop, and we're going to look for a match while I talk about how terrible these engines are. Oh, well, we're going to find a match right away. So, the engines themselves weren't actually that bad. The problem that Italy had, mostly because it was a small country with a small industrial base, is their fuel wasn't great. Let's see, 47mm of pen, 47mm of pen. Same muzzle velocity. I don't know why bring one over the other.
Attention to the designated grid square.
I'm just going to bring ammo. So, Italian fuel was bad. Like, during the Battle of Britain era, while the English were making 100 to 150 octane fuel for their Hurricanes and Spitfires, the Italians were doing good to have 80 octane fuel. That was their biggest limiting factor. Just fuel was bad. They could not refine or make good fuel. And because all of their money was already getting dumped into their military, they couldn't just go buy good fuel either. We know damn well Germany, the only people that liked them, wasn't going to sell them fuel. They didn't have enough fuel. And anyone else that they could theoretically buy fuel from probably didn't want to, also because of political reasons. You know, there's a war on and whatnot. So they had to work within the confines of their low-grade, low-octane fuel. I'm just going to estimate an average 80 octane. So the 14-cylinder two-row radial in that Fiat G50 I showed you, which I will jump into here shortly. If I don't die. They had a supercharger. I mean, a lot of, if not all, contemporary World War II era piston fighters had turbochargers, superchargers, or both. And, you know, my research started with, you know, why are the engines bad? Why do they make so little power? And I saw, you know, the 14-cylinder radial on the G50 there has a single-speed, single-stage supercharger that doesn't make a whole lot of boost. 3 to 5 pounds of boost. That's not great. Like, almost why bother? They didn't make they didn't have good superchargers because their fuel was bad. And if they ran more boost than that, you're going to start getting knock and other issues from having bad fuel. So they didn't bother developing better superchargers or better engines because they didn't have... I hit a palm tree. They didn't have good fuel. They were limited by the octane of their fuel, and they knew this. So they didn't waste time or effort developing... There we go. See, what was I saying about a good gun? One hit, one kill. And now they're doing that, so I'm going to relocate with my slow tank. Please, nobody see me while I'm in a spot I should not be in. Look, there's an airplane. My turret is too slow to point my machine guns at it. Oh, he's going to stall. Give them all 20 rounds of what for out of my magazine-fed anti-aircraft machine gun. Because we couldn't have nice things like belt-fed guns. I thought about shooting him with a cannon. That would have been hilarious. Ooh, somebody's shooting at me. Oh. That penetrated and took out my gunner. Now the loader's going to swap into the gunner seat. And I'm going to try and get into cover while our crew changes positions. Come on. Whoop! There we go. Again, straight through the face. Good pin. Guns are alright, but that's about the only thing they got going for. Anyway, the Italian engineers... Oh yeah. I'm hiding here. I can replace my dead crewman. The Italian engineers knew, you know, their fuel was crap, and they didn't bother building superchargers or engines or turbochargers that required more performance than they could get out of their low-grade fuel. So the engines they did have were fairly reliable. The engine in the Fiat G50 made 750-ish horsepower, which is half of what it should be. But when your supercharger is running at a quarter of the amount of boost it should be, because if you run more, you're going to get knocked and start breaking things because your fuel is bad. So they just had really low manifold pressure and low boost pressures because that's what they had. They were limited by the fuel they had, so they didn't bother over-engineering the engines. Also, partially, they were still kind of on an artisan workshop footing. So, engines were hand-built, hand-fitted by artisans, like Fiat and Bugatti. Those, great Italian car makers. Great in air quotes. So often, no two engines were identical. And you had... there's no pen. You didn't really have parts interchangeability. Because, these engines were hand-built, hand-fitted. My face armor? Alright, cool. We'll get the gun. Right there. Oh, that's not friendly. And we're about to die. Non-pen again. Come on. Yeah, with that one crewman dead in the turret, it just took too long to reload. I was unable to get another shot. But, look, spawn points. I get in my Fiat finally. Look at this finely crafted piece of engineering. It's part of how you end up with... the aircraft themselves, they were like sports cars. They were finely engineered. The problem was, they were... Design input was given from, 1930s gentleman pilots, which is why you ended up with open cockpit fighters, because, they were used to race planes, and they wanted to be able to get out of the cockpit quickly if the plane was on fire. If you had a bad, crash landing, and you had to get out of the cockpit quickly. What is this goofy thing on my screen? Why... War Thunder must have updated. Why is this changed? This is so squirrely. Whatever the update did to the controls here. Alright. Oh, and there's a biplane coming in on me, so I'm going to use my monoplane speed and escape. Because biplane's going to outturn me. And we're roughly equal in firepower. I'll have to use a different model of the airplane to show you what I was talking about with, the artisan craftsmanship. And that was their biggest limiting factor is, the planes, the engines, they were built by craftsmen, not manufacturers. So you had slower production. Biplane is still chasing. It's slower production and not parts commonality between things because of the hand fitment of that kind of artisan production. What has happened to the controls here? This is not right. So anyway, this plane, this specific engine is probably got like 3 pounds of boost. 3 to 5 pounds of boost. Because they were worried about fuel detonation and knock. And so missed all those shots because, I don't know, something updated and it reset the controls, and now I don't know how to fly my plane. But I got 2 kills for 1 death, so I did my part. I'll go back to the X-ray. They do have self-sealing fuel tanks. That's nice. But there we go. This hand-built Fiat engine, 729 horsepower. Maximum, if you're going to run more war emergency power, you get 850 for takeoff. Whoop-de-doo. Because this chunk here on the back of the engine, their single-stage, single-speed supercharger, which was kind of limited to about 9,000-ish feet anyway, which makes sense because it's an open cockpit. But, yeah, bad fuel was their limiting factor, so that's why they didn't bother engineering, designing, fine-tuning higher compression engines, better superchargers, turbochargers. Let's look at some other planes for examples. Look, here's a Piaggio engine, 850 horsepower standard, and a maximum of 960 on takeoff. Their design was basically limited because they were still in a craftsman artisan economy, and their fuel was garbage. And even later, when they were making license-built engines of this DB605 here, 1,200 horsepower. Well, let's round up. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. 1,300. Now, if we go to the original manufacturer, this is a 601. Makes 1,000, because this is a much earlier model plane. This is an E4. If we can look at a later model. Nope, that's still a 601. We need a 605. Here, they put those in the G's, didn't they? The G6, I remember. Everybody likes the G6. See, there's a 605. With 1,000. That's, theoretical. See how our takeoff power keeps going up? 1,600. The other one was like 1,300 on the other model of 109. Whereas, close, please. Thank you. This guy's 1,400 max. Because even using someone else's design and license building it, they're still got crappy fuel. So they can't push the engines as hard. You're going to run lower boost. You're going to have different ratios in turbos and superchargers. And that's Italy's problem. Those two things: bad gas and their artisans. Here, to make change, thank you, my artisan point. Let's go to the C200. Look at this engine cowling. Look how closely fitted it is to that engine. It's so stinking close. Wrong button, sorry. They had to make little humps for the rocker arms. And this grilled part, that's the oil cooler. There we go. I can get the indicator to work correctly. And this is a 1930s design. Some guy made that. This wasn't pressed out in a factory. This wasn't a stamped cylinder like the cowling on an F6F Wildcat. Some dude with hand tools made every single one of these for the hundreds of planes that they built. This engine cowling alone is a piece of artwork. Look at all of those bulges, round parts that had to be hand molded. Now you can tell, like this, let me go back to the X-ray, this engine, this Fiat A74, was delivered. This is another part of their production problem. Back to the artisan's idea. The engines, as I said, were built by artisans, by Fiat, and then sent to the production facility where they were building the planes. So that way they were broken up. The guys that built the planes didn't build the engines. They didn't know anything about the engines. They just stuck the engine on the plane once they had a complete airframe. So look at this. That's better without it. Exhaust manifold here and there are the exhaust ports. They just stick out and vent exhaust straight down. That doesn't help anything. That doesn't do anything for anyone. That's awful. You don't have hot exhaust gases and, the Meredith effect. Nothing giving you additional thrust. That does not help the plane at all. You can tell the guys were not, the one hand wasn't talking to the other, because the engine was built by one group of people and shipped over to the facility where the airframe was built, and then they just stuck whatever exhaust manifold on there and then stuck it on the plane. But you have all of these little fins in the oil cooler and all of this hand-done sheet metal work for this tight-fit cowling. And a couple machine guns. And nice self-sealing fuel tanks. Here's your oil reservoir back behind the engine. Anyway. That's what I was saying. These aircraft are pieces of art. And they had another problem. Let me go back to the planes here. Let's find us one of the ugly 3-engine bombers. They had a lot of those. The other limiting factor for Italy, they realized early on that they needed to, quote, modernize their military. End of World War I, everybody's got wooden fabric biplanes. And Italy was one of the first countries to jump on the military modernization bandwagon. That gave us, all-metal monoplane fighters and bombers. Well, at the time, the popular thing, like, take the Ford Trimotor, for example. 3-engine planes, for a brief period of time, were the thing. And then that's when Italy decided that they were going to modernize everything. So they had a whole bunch of new 3-engine designs. And they just stuck with it. They had a weird... They chose a weird hill to die on with their min-maxing. I'm going to fix my controls, and we'll play another game.